So first and foremost, before getting into the Word, we just pray to you, O King, that you would bless the words that come forth from my mouth, that they would be of your Spirit, that they would be said in power and authority, and that you would be pleased. In the name of your Son, Yeshua. Amen. So Genesis chapter 44, we're going to start in verse 18. The title of this Torah portion is Vayigash, which means, and he drew near. And we're going to start right there and get a full understanding of where this Torah portion is and where we're headed. Verse 18 says, and Yehuda, Judah, came near to him and said, O my master, please let your servant speak a word in my master's hearing, and do not let your displeasure burn against your servant, for you are like Pharaoh. That word, come near. Now, he came near, he drew near, is Vayigash, but that word to come near is nagash, which means to draw near. Now, who is drawing near in this instance is Judah. To whom is to Joseph. Now, he doesn't know at this point that he's Joseph. He's drawing near to him in the way that he believes is needed to be able to speak to him. But to understand where he came from, where Judah came from, we need to go back to Genesis 37 and see where this relationship is currently. Now again, a lot has happened in the last couple of weeks. We've talked about Joseph for a while. And part of that is his journey. Part of that is his being sold into slavery, being in Potiphar's house, being tempted and tested and sent to the prison, being able to discern the dreams of those who were there and to ultimately be lifted up. None of that was instant. All of it was over time. But the Lord's timing in all of it is more important than the expectation of the time throughout it. And I want to make that clear, that his will is not bound to time, is not bound to your circumstances, is not bound to your expectations or understanding of what is supposed to happen. So to go back to this, that Judah is currently under the understanding that, it's possible that, it's interesting, they never actually told their father the full story, even throughout everything that's happened. And you'll see what I mean by that. But the last thing that was done was Judah sold his brother. And so in his mind, that's where he's approaching Pharaoh's right hand from this perspective. He doesn't know that it's Joseph. For all he knows, he's been telling his dad that Joseph's dead, and his dad believes that his son is dead. And in his mind, that might be even true. He's been saying it for so many years that, my brother's dead, my brother's dead, my brother's dead. Well, if you don't know where he is, then for all in your mind, you can easily come to that conclusion and believe it. And so here we are, going back to Genesis 37 to kind of see that story, the first part of where Judah leaves off the relationship with Joseph. So Genesis 37, chapter 23. Yes, verse 23. Says, so it came to be, when Joseph had come to his brothers, that they stripped Joseph of his robe, the long robe which was on him, and they took him and threw him into a pit. And the pit was empty. There was no water in it. And they sat down to eat a meal. And they lifted their eyes and looked and saw a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels, bearing spices and balm and myrrh, going to take them down to Mitzrayim, to Egypt. And Judah said to his brothers, what would we gain if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Because the last thing that happened prior to this was they were going to kill him, flat out kill him. And Reuben said, don't kill him. And then he went away because in his mind he wanted to save him and then bring him back to his father. Let that be what it is to you. But Judah is now the oldest mentality here, and he speaks words that the rest of his brothers listen to him. So he said, what would we gain if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our flesh. And his brothers listened. And men, Midianite traders, passed by, so they pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. They took Joseph to Egypt. That's where it's left off. This transaction occurred. Judah said, let's put him in the pit, or let's sell him, and they pulled him up out of the pit, and then they sold him to traders passing by, and they brought him to Egypt. So last he saw it was as a transaction. Joseph, money for Joseph, and they split it amongst themselves. But the last we see is Judah making this decision and convincing his brothers to do this. So now let's go to 34 and 35, and let's just take a look. We're in verse 34 and 35, still of chapter 37, and let's just take a look at what then happens from Jacob's point of view. So they came back, they showed him the robe, and this is Jacob's response. Jacob tore his garments, put sackcloth on his waist, and mourned for his son for many days. And all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, now let me go down to Sheol to my son in mourning. So his father wept for him. And then, as we know, the Midianites sold him into Potiphar's house, and that whole thing starts getting rolling with everything that Joseph goes through. So let's jump to Genesis 45. Because we just saw where Judah left off, we saw where Jacob left off, and we're going to see real quick where Jacob ends up in 45, verses 25 to 28. And then we'll fill in the middle parts. So Genesis 45, starting in verse 25. They, meaning the brothers, they went up out of Egypt and came to the land of Canaan to Jacob their father, and they told him, saying, Joseph is still alive, and he is governor over all the land of Mitzrayim. And Jacob's heart ceased, for he did not believe them. But when they spoke to him all the words which Joseph had spoken to them, and when he saw the wagons which Joseph had sent to transport him, the spirit of Jacob their father revived. And Israel said, enough. My son Joseph is still alive. Let me go and see him before I die. The fullness of that is part of this Torah portion as well, where he comes and sees his son. And we'll take a look at that in a second. But let's keep reading. Let's Genesis 46, let's go 1-7. Israel sent out with all that he had and came to Beersheba and slaughtered slaughterings to the Elohim of his father Isaac. And Elohim spoke to Israel in the visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, here I am. Hinani, right? And he said, I am the Elohim of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Mitzrayim, for I shall make you there into a great nation. I myself am going down with you to Mitzrayim, and I myself shall certainly bring you up again. And let Joseph put his hands on your eyes. So when he had left him, when they brought back the robe, he was basically saying, let me die. And yet he still clung, he still hung on, but he was mourning for that entire time. And then when the brothers came back, when his sons came back and said, your son is still alive, he was revived, and he went and immediately sought the Lord. And the Lord comforted him even more, saying, when you go there, I will fulfill you. I will fulfill the promise that I've made throughout the generations, and and let Joseph put his hands on your eyes. Now, that's actually part of the next Torah portion where Joseph, when he meets him, when Jacob meets his son again, he says, well, now that I've seen him, I can die again. But the next Torah portion shows that when he does die, Joseph is there to put his hands on his eyes, to help him pass. And so it's just a beautiful picture of the way that the Lord holds us through that and held him through that. There was still the promise, and Jacob was still a part of the promise. And whether he stuck around for Benjamin's sake because he was still young or whatever, we're not entirely sure of those specific circumstances, but he was mourning that entire time and then revived and comforted. And so we're still reading verse 5. Jacob rose up from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel brought their father Jacob and their little ones and their wives, and in the wagons which Pharaoh had sent to transport him. And they took their livestock and their property, which they had acquired in the land of Canaan, and came into Egypt. Jacob and all his seed with him, his sons and his sons' sons, his daughters and his sons' daughters, and all his seed he brought with him to Mitzrayim. And so if we look at the total at that point, it ends up being 70 total that go. Now, again, it is interesting to see the Jacob story play out and the reconnection he finds in just the words spoken. Because when like I said, we're going to fill in the blanks, but just think about the whole Jacob experience. First of all, his struggle in serving Laban and everything for what he believed he should have gotten, and he had to serve again. Once for Leah, another for Rachel, and then more for the livestock and everything to come out. Ultimately, he was blessed. Ultimately, he had the 13 children, and he came out and he was blessed. Yet he was still connected to the events that happened when he left. I mean, if you have to think, it's almost like he's living in extremes, where Jacob, the extreme of working for Rachel. I mean, I'm sure he was excited. And then he was like, well, I got to do it again. And then it's the extreme of having to work for all the things that he did, but coming out blessed, he's still like, well, my brother, when I left, was going to kill me. And so the extreme of that, he was, as much as he had been blessed and as much as he came out with so much more than he left with, he was still afraid. He came out with fear. As much as he had spent time with the Lord and as much as the Lord had showed him different things of what to do in order to be what he became, and even along the way when he toiled and wrestled with God on the path and got blessed and a new name, he still was afraid. Because the last thing he knew was his brother was going to kill him. And so that never left his thoughts, I'm sure. And even within the time frame, it's possible that if he kept working because he knew that if he left, he was going to be found and killed. So he's like, as long as I'm here, I'm kind of safe doing what I need to do for what I've asked for. So maybe it was almost like a switch over of his mindset to keep him focused on something else rather than the imminent death that he faced when he left. And I really enjoyed Roderick's point from his message that the extreme of his mourning for his son Joseph was in direct response to, and even the love that he had for him, the favor that he had for him, was in direct response for the love that he had for Rachel. He served for Rachel. He got Leah. He served more for Rachel. He could have easily just been like, well, Leah's enough, let me move forward, but he did it again because of his favor for her. And so then to have Joseph be basically the remainder of what's left. I mean, Benjamin, his name got changed just because there was that reminder every time with Benjamin. I'm sure if his name stayed the same with which was the son of my sorrow, Benoni, every time he said his son's name, he would have remembered the love of his life's death, and that's just hard. And so that name change, even though Benjamin was changed to Benjamin, son of my right hand, I'm sure it still was a visual reminder every time he saw him. And so then to the focus all, again, the transfer of focus, to focus all his attention on Joseph, as possibly as a result of his wife Rachel's death and all of that meant to him. He focused on Joseph so that he could get through it. It was his way of transferring that emotional connection and tie. And then now Joseph is dead. According to the rest of his children, Joseph is dead. And so when he says he's going to mourn until death, I mean it's an extreme, but it's in response to his emotional state of all of the connections that he had, the way that he lived in an extreme emotional state. So it's just an interesting concept for that. But in 46:26 to 30, in chapter 46, if we just skip to verse 26, we'll see that his response, like I said, was, first of all, he brought 60 beans in all, and then the sons of Joseph were included, so that the total house of Jacob who were in Mitzrayim were 70. That's verse 27. And then he sent Judah before him to Joseph to point out before him the way to Goshen, and they came to the land of Goshen, which is the deal that Joseph made with Pharaoh to give them the land of Goshen so that they could live there and thrive. And then Joseph made his chariot ready and went to Goshen to meet his father Israel. And he peered him and fell on his neck, and they wept for a long time. And then Israel said right after, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face, that you are still alive." Now that didn't happen right away. It still takes a couple more chapters for him to kind of transfer things over. There's an interesting part where he goes before Pharaoh and blesses him. And I almost focused on that for a little bit, because that same word blessing is the same blessing that Jacob got from his father instead of Esau. It's the same word for blessing that when the Lord created everything, he blessed it. And so for then him to go before Pharaoh and bless Pharaoh, I found that very interesting. So, pursue that on your own, but it wasn't something that I felt was part of this discussion. So now that we know the response of Jacob and how that plays out, let's go back to the start of this Torah portion. Let's go back to Genesis 44, verse 18. And again, the word Vayigash, that's where we're kind of focused on. The word Vayigash means, and he drew near. Comes from the word nagash, which means to draw near. All right, so let's read that a little bit and see what happens in that section. Starting in verse 18. So Judah came near to him and said, "O my master, please let your servant speak a word in my master's hearing, and do not let your displeasure burn against your servant, for you are like Pharaoh." My master asked his servant, saying, "Have you a father or a brother?" And we said to my master, "We have a father, an old man, and a young child of his old age, and his brother is dead. And he alone is left of his mother's children, and his father loves him. And you said to your servants, bring him down to me, and let me set my eyes on him." And we said to my master, "The boy is not able to leave his father, for if he leaves his father will die." Now again, Judah is aware of his father's emotional state. Judah sees that his father put so much emotional energy and stake into the relationship with Joseph that once Joseph was deemed dead in his eyes, that transfer of favor went to Benjamin. Because in his mind, that's all he had left, even though he had other children. Even though there were other ones, I mean, they were more grown, but still they were his sons. And yet, because of his extreme thinking and his emotional transfer, he went from he went from fearing death in Esau to focusing on Rachel, to working for that end, and coming out of it still fearing Esau, and then finding comfort in Joseph and Benjamin, but then Rachel dies. So then the full of his attention goes on Joseph. Joseph dies. The full of his attention goes on Benjamin. And so you see that Judah at this point is explaining that because he can see it. He's not blind, but from where he was to where he is now, he can see that it hurt his father to have to send him. And that's part of the fullness of what Joseph was testing them in, whether he knew it or not. It was part of God's will for all of that to take place. And so his test to include, it was probably selfish as well to see Benjamin with his own eyes because that's his younger brother. But it's also part of the full picture. So, verse 22, he said to my master, the boy is not able to leave his father, for if he leaves his father shall die. But you said to your servants, unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you do not see my face again. And it came to be, when we went up to your servant, my father, and we told him the words of my master, and our father said, go back and buy us a little food. But we said, we're not able to go down. If our youngest brother is with us, then we shall go down, but we're not able to see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us. Then your servant, my father, said to us, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons, and the one went out from me, and I said, truly he is torn to pieces, and I have not seen him since. And if you take this one from me too, and harm comes to him, you shall bring down my gray hair with evil to Sheol. And now if I come to your servant, my father, and the boy is not with us, since his own life is bound up in his life, then it shall be when he sees that the boy is not with us, that he shall die. Because part of the test that Joseph put them through was he put the cup, he put the golden cup in Benjamin's bag. And then they sent him away and then pursued them and said, whoever's cup it is. And they were like, well, whoever it is should be put to death, be taken, And sure enough, it was in Benjamin's. And they were like, oh my goodness, and so they all got taken and are before Joseph. And so he's telling him why it shouldn't be Benjamin. And let's keep reading. For your servant went guarantee for the boy to my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, then I shall be a sinner before my father forever. And now please let your servant remain instead of the boy as a slave to my master, and let the boy go up with his brothers. For how do I go up to my father if the boy is not with me, lest I see the evil that would come upon my father? His response to the fact that Benjamin might be enslaved or even killed, when previously it was Joseph, and he said, just put him in the pit, and well, let's sell him, and then he's not our problem anymore. He saw how much of a problem it was with his father, how much it hurt him to see the loss of Joseph, and he couldn't bear it to have it happen again. And so instead of sending his brother into slavery and have it happen all over again, he offers himself. He says, take me instead. I will stay in his place. Let me be a slave to you, but send him back because I can't bear what might happen to my father. Judah offers himself in Benjamin's place. So let's skip to chapter 45, verse 4, and read a little bit more. Joseph said to his brothers, please come near to me. And when they came near, he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be grieved nor displeased with yourselves because you sold me here. For Elohim sent me before you to preserve life. For 2 years now, the scarcity of food has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there's neither plowing nor harvesting. And Elohim sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant in the earth, and to give life to you by a great escape. So then, you did not send me here, but Elohim. And he has set me for a father to Pharaoh, and master of all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Mitzrayim. He's looking Judah straight in the face. Judah, who is the one who decided to convince all his brothers to sell him into slavery and to never see him again. And Joseph says, I'm your brother. I'm the one that you sold, but don't worry about it. Because you didn't sell me. Elohim is the one who brought me here. Now that word, though, when it says in verse 4, Joseph said to his brothers, please come near to me, is the same word, nagash. It's the same as when Judah drew near to Joseph in the first place to plead his case and to offer himself. That word, nagash, has a sense of intimacy attached. Like if I were to just tell a story to one of you from here, this distance is enough for you to get the point, but not an intimate space. In fact, that nagash, that draw near, that come near, is a precursor of the to know, as in Adam knew his wife. There's a sense of intimacy. And so you have to look at that. That Judah knows that his story, in order to have impact, needs to be said at an intimate distance. He didn't even know that he was Joseph. He just knew that he needed to share his heart, and it needed to be close. So he drew near to him. Now the first occurrence of this word is Genesis 18. Chapter 18, verse 23, and that's when Abraham pleads with God to spare Sodom. That's the very first instance and usage of this word, nagash. When Abraham draws near to Elohim, because Elohim is furious with Sodom and Gomorrah and says, I will destroy them. Destroy them from the face of the earth. They're an abomination. What's going on there is beyond what I can handle, beyond what I can forgive, beyond what I can, and Abraham knows that Lot's in there, but in order to plead his case, he draws near to God, comes into an intimate space, comes to his heart to speak heart to heart, and says, would you also destroy the righteous with the wrong? And he gets them all the way from 50 people, says it multiple times, says, please forgive me, please let you not be angry with your servant, but would you do it for 40? Would you do it for 30? Would you do it for 20? Would you do it for 10? He gets all the way down to 10, from 50 to 10. And the Lord says, I would spare it for 10. And yet there weren't. But Abraham, in order to plead his case, had to get heart to heart. It wasn't just hey, can you just save my nephew, and whatever. No, it was he needed to have his words and his heart connect in an intimate way to the Father and his heart. He intimately approached the creator of the universe to plead his case, just as Judah did to Joseph. I mean, you have to think that from Judah's perspective, this is the master of all things in Egypt, second to Pharaoh. And he's already said what he's going to do. And so this weighs on Judah so much that he says, I'm going to go and approach him. I'm going to come into his intimate space so that my heart can be exposed and so that his heart can connect and maybe his mind and his will would be changed. His command would be changed. His punishment would be overturned. And it wasn't even just to say spare Benjamin. It was to say I just care about my father and my little brother, and take me, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter anymore what happens. You've already said something's going to happen, so take me. Let it be me instead. And in return, after that happens, we see in chapter 45, verse 1, Joseph was unable to restrain himself. He yelled at everyone to get out, so that it was just him and his brothers. And he said, "Come near to me. Come and be in my intimate space. I'm Joseph. I'm your brother. I'm the one that you sold, but since we're talking heart to heart, you didn't do it. It was Elohim that was in it all. So this guilt, this heaviness that you're feeling, just get rid of it. I'm your brother. I'm here. He sent me beforehand so that I would preserve life. He was working in it all, despite what you may think, despite what you did. And so it was that intimate connection that caused the fullness of the transformation, especially for Judah, throughout this entire story. And then what happens? So Joseph tells him, says, "Tell all these things to my father," and then basically says, "Don't quarrel on the way back." But they could have easily just come back, and they could have easily repented to their father, and then who knows what kind of rift that would have caused with them. But instead, they followed what Joseph told them to do and told their father exactly what Joseph said. And then we see him come to Egypt. We see him spend time with the father and then come to Egypt and then have the reconnection, and he's back with his son. And then it was so much for him. He was just like, I can die now. And who knows, maybe there was something in his heart that said there's no way that Joseph's dead, and he held on because of that. But he was able to return and have that relationship be reestablished, even though it was potentially moments or days before his death. It was another 17 years? All right, well then, he had a little bit of time. But he, the anguish that he exhibited, that Judah saw, changed his heart to feel inclined to share intimately with the master of the kingdom in order to spare his father and his brother by offering himself. And it's that intimate connection. I just want to kind of put the emphasis on that, Nagash, to draw near. Because again, what kind of impact would it have if he was just, far away? If he was just yelling from a distance, "No, spare us," or "Don't take him," yelling, if he was, it doesn't have that same kind of impact. When you get close to someone, when you draw near to them. I mean, I think of Earl. You ever get a hug from Earl? He draws near to you. He draws you near to him. It is an intimate connection, and he makes sure of it. And it's that kind of thing that when you connect heart to heart, that causes change. But let's look at another by the same or similar name and turn to Luke 22. Luke chapter 22, we're going to start in verse 39. So this is why, I just loved the worship that happened, because going to be talking about the anguish that Yeshua went through in the Garden of Gethsemane at the Mount of Olives. So starting in verse 39, chapter 22 in Luke, it says, "Coming out, he," as in Yeshua, "went to the Mount of Olives according to usage, and his taught ones also followed him. And coming to the place, he said to them, 'Pray that you do not enter into trial.' And he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, and falling on his knees, he was praying, saying, 'Father, if it be your counsel, remove this cup from me. Yet not my desire, but let yours be done. Not my will, but yours be done.' And there appeared a messenger from heaven to him, strengthening him. And being in agony, he was praying more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. And rising up from prayer and coming to his taught ones, he found them sleeping from grief. And he said to them, 'Why do you sleep? Rise and pray, lest you enter into trial.' And while he was still speaking, see a crowd, and he who was called Judas or Yehudah, one of the 12, was going before them and came near to Yeshua to kiss him. And Yeshua said to him, 'Yehudah, do you deliver up the son of Adam with a kiss?'" So here's that same phrase, came near or draw near. And it's the same usage, because how close do you have to be to kiss somebody? Pretty close, right? You have to be in their space. You have to be in an intimate space with them, an intimate distance. And so he came to him and approached him. This is Judas, or Yehudah. This is the very same name as what we're talking about in Genesis with Joseph. And he drew near to Yeshua, and he gave him a kiss. Now, what I like about this translation, about the Scriptures version, is in verse 48, it says, "Yehudah, do you deliver up the son of Adam with a kiss?" Now, other translations say, "Do you betray me with a kiss?" And we're going to look at why this was not betrayal, but the word deliver up is more accurate for what is actually occurring here. Because when someone approaches you in an intimate fashion, especially to give you a kiss, you have to allow it. There's an allowance of that relationship. And Yeshua, knowing especially what was happening, and saying in other areas in Matthew and Mark that my time is near, that look, see, they're coming, the one who will deliver me up, he knew. And yet he still allowed Judas to approach him in an intimate fashion, to give him a kiss, to deliver him up. If I ran up to any one of you and I just tried to kiss you, there might be some issues. If I go to kiss my wife, depending on her mood, no, but if I go to kiss my wife, there's not the issues, because we have that intimate relationship. We know each other. We've spent time together. We've formed that bond and that relationship. We've agreed to a covenant. And now the intimacy of our relationship affords me the opportunity to give her a kiss. And so in this instance, that relationship is there. The covenant that they had and the way that they formed their relationship and their bond of being one of the 12, of being with him as he moved and as he healed and as he blessed and as he did all these things, that afforded the intimacy that they had. Now, he still knew, and we'll take a look at that he knew this was his betrayer, as again, some translations say, but he knew that he would deliver him up. Now, when I think of all these things, when I think of Judah approaching Joseph, when I think of Judas approaching Yeshua, I also thought of Esther approaching the king. because in those instances, he knows Yeshua is the Messiah. In that instance, he knew that whoever this man was, he didn't know him as Joseph, but he knew that this man was second to Pharaoh, in place of Pharaoh in front of him. And yet, they both approached in an intimate fashion. And when we look at Esther, we see that when she wanted to approach him for the sake of her people, she risked death. Because her position, even though they were married, it still didn't afford her the luxury of doing it whenever. It had to be by the call of the one who was greater in the relationship to the lesser. And so in that instance, the fullness of that connection can be what it is to you. But I just see that as being a powerful thing that especially Judah was willing to risk his own death right away by approaching this man. And that was before Joseph had sent everybody out of the room. So his guards were right there. The people that could have easily just killed Judah on the spot were right there. And Judah needed to make the heart-to-heart intimate connection to save his brother. And it was worth anything and everything to do so. And so in verse 48, I just want to point out that word deliver up. Supposing that it was ordered. When I think of to deliver, I guess there's different connotations, but when I think of that, I think of like a delivery order or a pizza delivery or someone's delivering your mail. The one who brings it, let's say someone brings you the wrong pizza. I mean, to get mad at them, they didn't make it. They didn't put it in place. They didn't make sure that it was wrong and not good for you to eat. They just brought what they were told. Their job was to deliver it. The mailman, if he brings you good news or bad news, regardless, he's delivering it. It is his job to deliver that which he was told to do, that which his job entails. His role, the role that he plays is to deliver that to you. And so in a similar fashion, when I see this usage, rather than betrayal, I think of it as Judas was the one to deliver that piece of the total story, that part of the total plan. And if we look, we don't have to go there, but in Matthew 10:21, I'll read it, and it says that brother shall deliver up brother to death, and a father his child, and children shall rise up against parents and shall put them to death. Now that also connects me to Joseph and his brothers, that they delivered up his brother to death. And then there was allowances throughout that so that Joseph would live, so that Joseph would struggle, but then ultimately so that Joseph would be raised up to a position in order to save not only his brothers, but everyone. I mean, the famine was everywhere. And so he not only saved his brothers from famine when he gave them extra, when he called him to take care of them, but he was set in charge so that the whole of Egypt and beyond would be able to partake in amidst the famine. And to the point where even in this Torah portion, it's toward the end of it, it's like they gave everything to get food. Everything. They gave up livestock. They gave up land. They gave up everything that they had just so that they could live. And then Pharaoh, I'm almost connecting it to the blessing that Jacob gave him, that because of that blessing, he had everything. But the point is that this delivering up that his brothers did for Joseph was already ordered, was already set in place, was supposed to happen for the sake of what was to come. Because in Genesis 45:8, he says, "You did not send me, but Elohim did." He could have easily at that point blamed his brothers for everything that happened. Well, said, well, okay, I'm going to kill all of you except Benjamin. Because, that's what you wanted to do to me in the first place. Or, hey, you're all my slaves, except Benjamin. He's going to be the slave master and take you all out. He could have easily done something like that. But in his wisdom and with his testing and trial and struggle, he learned the right way to be, the righteous way. And so when he said that to his brother, looked him in the face and said, you didn't send me here but Elohim, I can't even imagine what that was like. For them to even say, for him to even say, I'm Joseph, that in and of itself, it knocked them off their feet. It knocked even his dad off their feet. They're like, you were dead. How is this possible? And then all the wave of emotions, the guilt and everything from everything that they put him through, I'm sure just came back, and he just looked at him and said, no, Elohim did this. He ordered this. And you delivering me up was for the benefit of all. And so that's why in the garden, even when I look at that Jesus knew when he was praying to the Father, his betrayal, his delivering up was imminent. It was the next thing that happens. And he says to the Father, yet not my will, but yours be done. And just to point out again, like Joe said in his message, it was both for silver. Both these Judas and Judases, and they betrayed or delivered up their brother for money. But it was on time, at the right time, for a purpose that ultimately gets played out and revealed. So let's follow back on this full story and go to Mark 14. Now, remember, Pastor Chris isn't here, and you guys didn't have Bible study, so I'm going to take a little bit longer, just because, I think you guys can, you missed out a little bit from no Bible study, so I'm going to kind of maybe take that extra time. So, but let's go to Mark 14 and see where we can get to. And remember, the title of this overarching message is His will be done. Mark 14, we're going to start in verse 10. And we're going to start at where this delivering up begins. And Yehuda from Kirioth, so Judas from Kirioth, one of the 12, went to the chief priest to deliver him up to them. And when they heard it, they were glad and promised to give him silver. And he was seeking how to deliver him up conveniently. Jump to 17, verse 17. And evening having come, he with the 12, this is Yeshua, as they sat down and ate, Yeshua said, truly I say to you, one of you who is eating with me shall deliver me up. And they began to be grieved and to say to him, one by one, is it I? And another, is it I? And he answering said to them, it is one of the 12, he who is dipping with me in the dish. The son of Adam is indeed going, as it has been written of him, but woe to that man by whom the son of Adam is delivered up. It would have been good for that man if he had not been born. And as they were eating, Yeshua took bread. So he's doing this right after saying, I know that I will be delivered up by one of you here. Yet let's do this. He took the bread, having blessed it, he broke it and gave it to them and said, take, eat, this is my body. And taking the cup, giving thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank from it. And he said to them, this is my blood, that of the renewed covenant, which is shed for many. Truly I say to you, I shall certainly no more drink of the fruit of the vine till that day when I drink it anew in the reign of Elohim. And having sung a song, they went out to the Mount of Olives. So that's where we picked up before, where they were at the Mount of Olives. And he prayed to the Father, not my will, but yours be done. And then he was delivered up by the intimate approach of a kiss. Let's look at John chapter 13. Each of these, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, each of these have a piece and part of the fullness of the garden and the delivering up. We're going to look at part of it. So let's go to John chapter 13. I'm going to start in verse 2. And supper taking place, the devil, having already put in the heart of Judas from Kiriath, son of Simon, Shimon, to deliver him up, Yeshua, knowing that the Father had given all into his hands and that he had come from Elohim and was going to Elohim, rose from supper and laid aside his garments, and having taken a towel, he girded himself. After that he put water into a basin, and began to wash the feet of the taught ones and to wipe them with the towels with which he was girded. And so he came to Simon Peter, and he said to him, Master, do you wash my feet? Yeshua answered and said to him, You do not know what I am doing now, but you shall know after this. Kepha, Peter said to him, By no means shall you wash my feet ever. Yeshua answered him, If I do not wash you, you have no part with me. Simon Peter said to him, Master, will not all my feet then, but also my hands and my head? Yeshua said to him, He who has had a bath does not need to wash except his feet, but is clean altogether. And you are clean, but not all of you. For he knew who would deliver him up. So he said, You are not all clean. So when he had washed their feet and taken his garments and sat down again, he said to them, Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and master, and you say, Well, for I am. Then if I, master and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I give you an example, that you should do as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is an emissary greater than he who sent him. If you know these teachings, blessed are you if you do them. I do not speak concerning all of you. I know whom I have chosen, but that the scripture might be filled, he who eats bread with me has lifted up his heel against me. Now that right there is from Psalm 41:9. And the first part of that starts with even my own friend in whom I have trusted will eat bread with me and lift up his heel against me. My own friend in whom I have trusted. Again, that intimate relationship. I mean, you wouldn't be terribly surprised if a random person decided to have something against you. In this day and age, it would be most likely someone suing someone else. People love to do that now for some reason. But to have a friend do it, someone that you've known, you've maybe been in, if it's a business ordeal, someone you've been in business with, someone that you've trusted secret and special things with, you've spent time with, maybe their family or something like that, to have them be the one to sue you, to have them be the one to say that you hurt them and to want to act out against it in return, or to deliver you up to the authorities for something, or whatever the case may be. When it's that intimate relationship, a friend that you've trusted, that's when it hurts. Otherwise, you're just mad. You get sued by someone, you're like mad. You don't really get hurt. There's no emotional attachment other than just like, I didn't deserve this, or why did they do this, or who the heck are they? But like, if it's a friend, you're like, why? Why would you do this? I know your kids. Our wives go out to dinner, twice a week or something like that. It's this, when it's an intimate relationship, it hurts all the more. And maybe that's why he was even in the garden praying to the Father. Maybe that's what the cup was so hard to bear, that his friend, his trusted friend, was delivering him up. But he said, not my will, yet yours be done. Because he knew, even now, when they're sitting together, he's washing their feet. He washed Judas's feet. He wasn't left out of this. He wasn't like, oh, well, you, not you, you're the unclean one, by the way, so I'm not going to wash you. There wasn't an outward aspect of that. He broke bread with them. He ate, he celebrated the Pesach with them. He washed their feet, and he knew the whole time. He knew the whole time. In verse 2, it says that the devil already put it in the heart of Judas to deliver him up. Jesus can sense the demons in people just by walking past them. He can cast them out at will. He can use his authority to send them into the swine. He could have easily rebuked Judas and had him come back and turn. But the Lord's will was that this should happen the way that it happened. He'd already put it in his heart. Not to mention, Job, anyone? When the devil went before the Lord and said, can I mess with him? And the Lord's like, yeah, just don't kill him. We know that the Father has all authority to even allow any of it to happen. And then if we go to verse 27, still in chapter 13, it says, after the piece of bread, Satan entered into him. Yeshua therefore said to him, what you do, do quickly. So not only did he not rebuke him for it, but he said, do it. He said, let's go for it, because this is the will of the Father, and you're a part of the plan. Now, as a side note, there's this, I grew up thinking, and whether you want to think it or not now, after I say it, that's your choice, but I grew up thinking that suicide meant you didn't go to heaven. And I know that the Catholic Church kind of pushes that a lot. But I will point out that in Matthew 27, verse 3, it specifically says that Judas went before the priests and he repented. He tossed the silver, tossed the coins. And then in verse 4, he says, I have sinned. He confessed with his mouth. And I don't know about you, but the word says that if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us and cleanse us of all unrighteousness. So just throwing that out there. Whether, what happened after of him hanging himself and committing suicide and whatever, that tells me that he was right with the Father in his heart, even if the response in the natural, was probably going to be, he was going to get killed anyway. After what he did, but. So, we've got Judah with Joseph, and we've got Judas with Yeshua. Both of them are Yehudah, so let's take a look at that word, that name. So the meaning of it is praised, or he shall be praised. The Hebrew characters are Yod, He, Dalet, He. The name of Yehovah is Yud, He, Vav, He. Yod is that arm or hand. And we've got He, which is the breath. And in Yehovah, we've got the Vav, which is the tent peg and or the hook that connects. And then we've got the other He, which is breath. In Yehudah, we've got Yud, He, Dalet, He. Dalet is the door, yes. And the root of that is yada, which means to shoot, like arrows, or to cast down, or to throw down, or to give thanks, to give laud, to give praise, or to confess. And in this sense, to confess the name of God. Now, when I think of to shoot, I think of children in the quiver. As in, you are blessed by by what comes from your hand, by what comes from comes out of your door. That the things, the yada is to be praised, is that those things which you've been giving, the arrows, the quiver, the children, the blessings in your life, are to be praised to the Father. That is from his hand that you have those things. And to cast down, I think of the seed that's thrown, and that when good seed comes up, you praise the Father. But that dalet, which is before the last hay. Now, with the name of Yehovah, that vav connects. It holds it together. With a dalet, think of a door. There's a choice. You can choose to open or close the door. You can choose to praise or not praise. You can choose to live a life that praises the Father or not. And the dalet is also a mouth. So you can choose to open or close your mouth and praise. You can choose to speak or not to speak. When Judah went before Joseph, he could have stayed silent and the punishment would have been carried out on Benjamin. But he chose to speak up. On the flip side, or at least a connected side, when they threw him in a pit, he could have stayed silent and he would have been in the pit and Reuben would have come back and gotten him and been the hero of the family and whatever else, but he chose to say, no, let's sell him. With Judas, he could have kept quiet and just been one of the 12 and followed, but he chose to go to them and say, I will give up. I will deliver you Yeshua. And they gave him money for it. And when I think of dalet, it brings me all the way back to Genesis 4, because it's the door. And what happened with Cain and Abel. Here is the door to sin. Sin is waiting at your door, and you have a choice to open it and let sin in, destroy your house, take over all that you hold dear, ruin the intimate and safe space that you have, or you can choose to keep the door closed. So there's a lot of different aspects of that. And so Judah, Yehudah, meaning he shall be praised. The interesting aspect of that is that, I don't know, it connects me to the shall. It connects me to every knee shall bow. Every knee should confess. Because there's parts in the shall that are not a choice. When it comes to the will of the Father, when it comes to that breath, that door is standing between the two breaths, when it comes to that breath, if it comes from the Father, it will happen. Back in creation, God spoke, and it happened. It wasn't God spoke and we got to then vote on it and see which things we wanted in creation and see the time frame of how creation was going to work, or that we got to choose who Adam and Eve were going to be and what kind of choices they were going to make in the garden. That there wasn't this, it wasn't democratic. When the breath comes from the Father, it will happen in his timing. Because God spoke. When God speaks, that's it. Just like, again, going back to Esther, when the king spoke and his decree was set, that's it. So when it says every knee will bow, every knee shall bow, and every tongue confess, you have to think that there's two parts to that. I did a study on, and I still think of it every time, that to submit is a choice until it's not a choice. If you willingly submit, you enter into the goodness of the Father. If you don't willingly submit and you run out of that time, he will force you to submit as a slave or a servant to his will. Either way, his will be done. So when every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess, that's your choice until it's not. Because either way, he's the King of Kings, he's the Lord of Lords, he's the creator of all things, and his will be done. It will happen with or without our help. So when Yeshua saw and knew that Judas was going to betray him, he could have easily spoken out. But he knew that the Father's will was greater than his desire. And that's why he said, not my will, but yours be done. So we have the Father's will, that Joseph would go before his brothers. And he used Judah to get to that point. And we have the Father's will that Jesus would be sacrificed. And and use Judas to get to that point. Both were for the benefit of all. You think about that at the time, that Joseph was sent for the benefit of all in order to save them from the famine that was to come. Just as Jesus was sacrificed to save all. And the coolest part, one of the coolest parts that I found about this message, about this Torah portion, was the very last scripture. So we're going to go to Genesis 47. Genesis 47, verse 27. The very last part of this Torah portion says this. Israel dwelt in the land of Mitzrayim and in the land of Goshen, and they had possessions there and were fruitful and increased exceedingly. Now, we talked about Israel, or Jacob, and his emotional struggle. His emotions that basically lasted a long time. From the time that he was sent away from his father, ran out because he was afraid. The 20 years he spent with Laban, all the time that he was basically emotional for the things that were there, hoping that he wasn't getting, cut out of anything or swindled or whatever. And then he comes out blessed, but he still has the fear. He's still emotional. And then his wife dies, and he's still emotional. And then his son supposedly dies, and he's still emotional. I mean, all of these things. And yet, when he comes back and is rekindled with his son Joseph, and they dwell in the land that was set aside for them to be able to live, it says that they had possessions there, were fruitful and increased exceedingly. If we go all the way back to Genesis, if we go all the way back to the beginning part of Genesis and creation, what was the purpose of man? To be fruitful and multiply. So because of Joseph's struggle, because of everything that happened to not only Joseph, but everything that happened to Jacob and everything that happened from Abraham through Isaac, because of all that, right here, it says they were fruitful and increased exceedingly. They were finally able to fulfill the command that was given. God's will doesn't work through single moments. It works through them all. It works from before time, before your time, in your time, past your time, through all time. His will does not hinge on your ability, but on His word. And whether you are an instrument of righteousness or unrighteousness, whether you are clean or unclean, there's a part that you play in His will in time. His will be done. So, Father, I thank you. You are so good. It says that you work all things for the good of those who love you and those who are called according to your purpose. I thank you for your purpose. I thank you for the call. And I thank you for the good. All things are good, all things are tov, and we don't see the big picture. But help us to see what we need to see. Help us to know what we need to know. Help us to fit in to your plan and your purpose. For you are always good. And as your Son even said, let not my desire or my will be done. Father, let yours be done. In the name of your Son, Yeshua, HaMashiach, the name above all names, by the power of the Ruach HaKodesh, the breath that came forth and dwells with us, Father. It is in that name and in that power that we pray. Amen.